The Bye-mageddon is upon us, so it's time to get prepared. We've got starts, we've got sits, and we've got everything in between on the Fantasy First Down. I'm Ben Wasley. Welcome to the Fantasy First Down. And there are count them, six teams on bye this week. So it's really important in the last week before the fantasy playoffs to get those starts and sits just right. Today we'll be talking starts and sits and all of my fantasy football rankings. If you haven't already, it'd be great if you could like and subscribe on YouTube. If you've got any questions, pop them in the comments below, or you can also check us out on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down or on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. We aim to answer all your questions over there as well. My rankings are also available over at ffdfantasyfootball.com, and you can check out my articles at football.rasball.com. But let's talk rankings, and we're starting off, as we always do, with the quarterbacks. And there is those top couple of guys there. Lamar Jackson is missing, but if you got Allen, you got Hurts, you're starting them every single week. And Joe Burrow is turning into an every week starter as well. Dallas is a team you can run on. I do think Chase Brown is going to be very heavily involved, but you've still got to start Burrow. Number 4 is the interesting one, though. I've been talking for weeks in my Streamers and Stash show about stashing for week 4. A lot of people have the likes of Jaden Daniels, Lamar Jackson, CJ Stroud. You need someone to cover you for this week, and Sam Darnold was available in a lot of leagues. So hopefully you stashed him in advance, because he is a fantastic start this week against Atlanta. Another good stash start that you might like, Baker Mayfield's another guy I've talked about a lot this season. Even with Chris Godwin out, he's still a very good option against Las Vegas. You can score a lot of points against them, even though they do concede a lot on the ground. I do still think Baker's going to be heavily enough involved to make him a good, solid option. Now, we saw that Kyler Murray was disappointing last time he took on Seattle, but this time around, I do think it could be different. We do see with these double-up games that often the second time, things go a little bit better and the game flows a bit different, especially now that this game is in Arizona instead of in Seattle. Patrick Mahomes, obviously against the Chargers, that's a tough matchup, but I do think you've got to start Mahomes if you have him. Tua against the Jets, another tough matchup, but again, I feel like there's going to be enough passing volume there and opportunities for him to score that you're going to have to start him, even though it is a tough defense in the Jets. And Brock Purdy, no snow this time, does seem to be getting healthier. I think against the Bears, even in that tough matchup, he is still a good startable option. Now, below there, obviously, hopefully you started Goff. If you had him, Russell Wilson gets the Browns. You can definitely throw on the Browns, but we have seen that Russell Wilson's been very boom-bust. Hopefully this is a boom game for him. And I think Caleb Williams is turning into a viable option. He's had some really easy matchups the last couple of weeks, and he's taken advantage of them, but we'll see if he can transfer that into a tougher matchup against San Fran. Justin Herbert's a tough one because a lot of people have Herbert and have been starting him the last couple of weeks in those good matchups. Against the Chiefs, that flips all around. They're one of the better defensive teams, and that's going to make it a very tough matchup for Herbert against the Chiefs. And someone like a Will Levis, for example, is not a crazy streamer given he takes on Jacksonville. Plenty of other options down there. I don't really love any of them. Guys that have upside, someone like a Cooper Rush against Cincinnati is considered the 3rd most points against quarterbacks this season. If you're desperate, he is someone that you can turn to in a pinch. Now, running backs. Saquon, you're always starting. Alvin Kamara, you've got to start. Chase Brown, very high, but he takes on Dallas. Dallas has conceded a heap of points to running backs. In fact, Dallas has conceded the 4th most points to running backs in the league. So this is going to be a good Chase Brown game, I suspect. Devon Achane just scoring so many points, even in weeks where he's not rushing well. He's getting the passing work. He's someone that you just absolutely have to start. Bijan Robinson, tough rushing defense in Minnesota. Minnesota have conceded the 3rd fewest points against running backs and the most points against wide receivers. So you do have to feel like there's a bit of risk here. But with Bijan, in games, especially where they're behind, I think they're probably going to be behind against the Vikings, he does become a viable option. Obviously, we've seen that Jacobs and Gibbs and Montgomery already had good weeks. Hopefully you started them. Bucky Irving gets that fantastic matchup against the Raiders. Assuming he's healthy, he's someone that you absolutely have to start. And if he's not, or regardless, you probably want to start Rashad White as well. Kyron Williams finally gets a good matchup against Buffalo. He's not getting a lot of receiving work, and especially in PPR, that makes him very risky, but I do still think he is a solid option. And James Cook is turning into an every down starter. He's been scoring consistently. He's been a good option. Obviously, it's not another snow game, but I do still think he is going to be solid. Tony Pollard gets that great matchup against Jacksonville, but with Tyjae Spears back, that just takes his volume away a little bit. Not really using him effectively at the moment, but he's still a guy you can absolutely start. Kenneth Walker, assuming he is healthy, takes on Arizona, and Arizona is certainly a team you attack on the ground. They're not the easiest team to run against compared to previous seasons, but still easier to run on them than throw on them. If he's out, obviously Zach Charbonnet moves up to a very similar position, honestly. He'll probably be 12 or 13. James Conner's been losing some touches to Trey Benson, but ever since they re-signed him last week, all of a sudden he's back to being the clear lead back. We saw that he was okay against Seattle last time, but now that they're at home, I think he probably has a better game. You can certainly run on Seattle, even though their defense has improved. Now, a couple of streamers in here, guys that weren't previously starters. They were handcuffs. I talk about how you need to roster handcuffs. Well, you weren't rostering Isaac Garendo because he was number 3 before 1 and 2, CMC and Jordan Mason, went out last week. Obviously, if you've got him, you spent a whole heap of fab on him. Kind of got to start him. You can definitely run on Chicago. Chicago is a team that has conceded the 10th most points to running backs and the 4th fewest points to wide receivers and the 2nd fewest points to quarterbacks. So obviously teams are running on them. Also helps that Chicago is usually behind. Therefore, you are running on them because you're ahead. So Garendo's a good, solid option. Presumably, he is the starter. Braylon Allen I like as well. Miami, likewise, teams typically run on Miami, though they have had an improved run defense the last few weeks. But despite that, over the course of the season, 11th most points conceded to running backs, 3rd fewest points to quarterbacks and wide receivers. So you can expect the Jets will have to go on the ground against them. He's a good, solid option. You definitely must pick him up. If you've been watching my stuff, you'll already have him and you're prepared for this moment. But if not, hopefully he's still available and you can get him. If you don't have him, you really should have been listening and gotten him because he's been my favorite handcuff all season. Rico Dowdle has been turned into the every down guy. It's not easy to run on Cincy, but he's getting such a good workload. So I do think he's going to be involved with touchdown chances. Aaron Jones has been losing some snaps. He's had some fumble issues. That's brought Cam Akers and even Ty Chandler involved. That's why he's a little bit lower down. Kind of similar issue with Tyrone Tracy, who's been losing touches to Devin Singletary. I feel like they're just trying to protect him a little bit now that they know that they're out of the fantasy playoffs, seeing what they have in Singletary and seeing if they want to keep him around or just lean on Tracy next year. So that means Tracy's a little bit risky. Najee Harris, same deal, kind of tough matchup as well. Plus he is splitting with Jalen Warren. They're both okay starts this week, considering moving DeAndre Swift above them now that Roschon Johnson's out. But against San Fran, it's not that easy to pass. So I feel like they probably will lean on Swift a little bit. So for that reason, I'm considering moving up. He could move up as high as 18 potentially with the news that Johnson's out. Still haven't really settled on that. Check out my rankings over the next 24 hours to see what happens with that. Chuba Hubbard obviously losing snaps to Brooks likewise, and it's a tough matchup against Philly. That's why he's down there. Have considered putting White above him as well. Isaiah Pacheco, still very risky. He and Kareem Hunt, hard to start, but Pacheco's easier at least because he is someone who's going to have his snaps grow. Travis Etienne's back in that committee with Tank Bigsby. They take on Tennessee. That is not the greatest running matchup. It's okay. It's kind of a middle-of-the-road situation, but with them splitting it and likely behind, it's hard to really trust them, but Etienne's the guy you want in that backfield. Nick Chubb struggled last time against Pittsburgh. They're likely to be behind. He's not used when they're behind. We've seen that that's generally Jerome Ford that's on the field, and they generally just don't run and let Jameis Winston pass. So that means that Chubb is lower down than usual, and I have no idea what to do with the Vegas guys. Alexander Madison probably takes the lead role if he's starting, but there's no guarantee of that. If he's not, is it Amir Abdullah? Do we see a lot more Sincere McCormick? I don't want any of those guys realistically. Gus Edwards, likewise, same situation in that Chargers backfield. He seems to be splitting with Vidal. I don't trust any of them, especially against KC, the hardest team in the league to run on. So don't start Edwards unless you have to. No real great options here. Charbonnet will obviously jump up a lot if things change. Everyone else is basically a backup because there's so many teams on bye. Everyone else kind of raises up. I don't want to start any of these guys unless you're desperate. Wide receivers, Chase must start. Jefferson, despite the lack of touchdowns, still got to start him. AJ Brown against Carolina, big scoring upside there, even though I think we see a big Saquon Barkley game. Puka Nakua and Cooper Kupp against Buffalo, tough matchups, but you still got to start Puka, and I think you probably got to start Kupp, especially in PPR as well. Puka, very, very, very difficult to trust, but I still think the upside is huge. So for that reason, because of them, despite the matchup, I'm still starting Puka Nakua. Same thing with Cooper Kupp. George Pickens gets that great matchup against Cleveland. Assuming he is healthy, he is a must start for me as well. Mike Evans, despite the tough matchup against the Raiders, I'm starting him every week. He just always has scoring upside. He always has big play upside. He always has touchdown. And he always has the upside of doing absolutely nothing, because there are always those weeks where Mike Evans sucks, but you've kind of got to risk it for the biscuit with him. T. Higgins, again, a little bit boom bust, taking on Dallas. Look, you can run on Dallas. We know this, but you can also pass on them. They conceded the 5th most points to quarterback. So I do think that T could have another big game. And Drake London gets Minnesota, the best matchup in the league. He is a great start for me this week. Where it gets a little bit iffy is after this, CeeDee Lamb against Cincy. Look, this is a pretty good matchup, realistically. 3rd most points conceded to QBs, but only 11th most points to wide receivers because they concede so many to tight ends. With Jake Ferguson back, that could have an impact, but I still think CeeDee Lamb is a good start. Lad McConkey against KC. You can definitely score points from the slot against KC, mainly to tight ends, but slot receivers have success against them as well. So Lad, I think, is a solid chance. KC, very good against the run, but does concede some points against the pass. Calvin Ridley against Jacksonville, fantastic matchup, top 3 wide receiver matchup. He's a guy you want to start. And Jacoby Myers, the highest I've seen him in ever, potentially, gets the Bucs. You can definitely pass on the Bucs, and Jacoby Myers is the top guy in their offense from the wide receiver, and probably in the general perspective outside Brock Bowers. So he and Bowers are going to be the guys to target against the Bucs. They are very susceptible against wide receivers, 9th most points conceded, and against tight ends, 7th most points conceded. Tyreek Hill, kind of hard to trust, especially against the Jets, but you can't sit Tyreek unless you've got someone with a lot of upside. JSN against Arizona had a solid game last time, 77-odd yards and a touchdown. Can he do it again? Not very confident, but as Bobby Lamarco said on the Razzball podcast when I was on with him on Friday night, DK Metcalf has really struggled against the Cardinals in the past. This is going to be a tough game for him, but his DK Metcalf is really hard to sit. Both of the Jets guys against Miami, we know how good Miami is against wide receivers. Hard to trust any of them, but you're unlikely to have better options available. Marvin Harrison Jr. was okay against Seattle last time, but gosh, he's scary to start at the moment, especially in an okay matchup. DJ Moore against San Fran, and also, I guess, Keenan Allen against San Fran had a couple of good matchups in the last couple of weeks, and they paid off, but they're not going to have great matchups every week. You cannot expect that's going to be the new normal. They struggled for most of this season. There's hope there that they'll be that good, but I don't think you can necessarily assume it, so don't start them over starts. Jerry Jeudy, same thing, had some good weeks, but you can't trust him against Pittsburgh. He was average, so was Elijah Moore last time against Pittsburgh. I expect the same thing will happen. Brian Thomas against Tennessee, solid matchup. I think he's going to be okay. And both of the 49ers guys against Chicago. Chicago's a very tough matchup. One of them will probably have a solid game, but I think we probably see more of Kittle. A little bit of Garendo, but with Garendo in for CMC, it does kind of give you a little bit more upside with Jennings and Samuel. One less top guy to worry about. Khalil Shakir, solid PPR option, okay in half PPR against the Rams. And Darnell Mooney, he's had a couple of disappointing weeks, but now he takes on Minnesota. This is a fantastic matchup for him, top matchup in the league. I expect him to bounce back, or at least he's got a chance to. Christian Watson, obviously, I've been high on for a while. He had that big game, so that's great. Devon Smith has been struggling, but takes on Carolina, so he's got TD upside. Tossed up moving him higher. Tossed up moving him as high as even above Debo, potentially. He's someone I'm really not set on yet. I want to know that he's healthy. And then I'll think about moving him higher. It just feels like it's going to be more of a Brown game and particularly a Barkley game. Addison gets a good matchup against the Falcons, but very hard to trust. Nick Westbrook-Akine, 8 touchdowns in 8 games, which is truly insane because he's only had over 3 receptions in one of them. And even in that one, he only had 5. So very hard to trust NWI, but against Jacksonville, he's someone that I think has some upside. All of the Chiefs guys, 1 or 2 of these guys will go off. You don't know which it's going to be. The others will be pretty average. So guys like Hopkins and Worthy, they're risky starts even with so many bye weeks around. Jalen Waddle, someone I really like in the fantasy playoffs, but not this week against the Jets. It's a tough matchup. Having said that, he's had some success against the Jets in the past. So if you're desperate, I'd start him over guys like Cooper and Moore, who Cooper doesn't even have a clear starting role, isn't even playing all the snaps. And we talked about Elijah Moore before. Everyone below this, like a Dunze and below, real scary starts. I know Adam Thielen had a good game last week, but he's taking on Philly. They're tough. Parker Washington, same thing, had a great game, but he takes on Tennessee. Pretty tough matchup, and we don't really know exactly what his role looks like. Everyone below that is real scary. Finally, tight ends. Brock Bowers, I love this week. I love him most weeks. A big fan of Brock Bowers. Talked about this in the preseason. He's going to have another big, well, he's going to have a big career realistically, but I expect a big week this week. Trey McBride against Seattle's just getting so many targets of late. Not many touchdowns, but especially in PPR, fantastic start. George Kittle should be better without CMC, so he moves above Kelsey for me. Also a solid matchup against the Bears, who concede more against the slot. Travis Kelsey against the Chargers, that's a fine matchup, I guess. You got to start Kelsey if you have him. David Njoku, again, you kind of got to start him because of the volume, but it's hard to trust. Jonnu Smith had a couple of big weeks, but do I trust him? Absolutely not. Takes on the Jets, very tough Jets matchup. They've conceded the fourth fewest points to tight end, so I don't trust him, but we'll see what happens. TJ Hawkinson, his snaps are starting to rise. He's a good, solid start this week, but not over those other guys above him, obviously. But against Atlanta, there's going to be some scoring upside. He could have an okay game, but he's also got a low floor. Same thing with Kate Otten, very low floor, especially against the Raiders. But he's been getting so many targets of late. Against the Raiders, they've conceded the third most points to tight ends. So the matchup's good. You feel like the target's going to be there, but his floor's still very low because he's Kate Otten. And because you got Mike Evans back now. Evan Ingram, very low touchdown upside. Never scored more than 4 touchdowns in the season since 2017 when he debuted with the Giants. And even then, he only scored 6. That's so low for a tight end. He has 1 this season. This doesn't feel like the matchup for him against Tennessee, who are bottom 10 matchup for tight ends. But he should at least get 5 to 7 targets and do something with that. So he's a solid option, especially in PPR. Everyone below this is a little bit scary. Will Dissly takes on the Chiefs. He's an okay streamer. He was terrible last week, but the Chiefs have conceded the 4th most points to tight ends. So I do feel like he's someone you can use. Pat Fryermuth's had a couple of good weeks. We saw he was okay in the last few weeks. So against Cleveland's top 10 matchup for a tight end, I feel like he's an okay option. Same thing with Jake Ferguson coming back from injury. And in fact, Dalton Kincaid coming back from injury. And if you're real desperate, you can use someone like a Noah Gray who's been scoring a bit recently. Juwan Johnson also moves up with Taysom Hill being out. But I don't feel great about any of these other guys here. And that's all we've got for the start-sit show for Week 14. Bit more of a brief one this week because there's so many teams on bye. If you got questions, comments below or message me on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down. Or if that doesn't work for you, on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with Noah. I do tend to get Instagram first because I get better notifications for it. But if Twitter's what you use, feel free to message me on there. Ideally DM, but I'd accept a tweet as well. Are we still calling them that? Who knows? Obviously, the rankings are up at ffdfantasyfootball.com and will continue to get updated. You can also check out my articles over at football.rasball.com. They've got some great tools over there. And of course, you can like and subscribe on YouTube. We would appreciate it if you would do that. I will catch up with you guys for the fantasy playoffs in week 15. Good luck for your last week of the regular season. I will see you then.